In the biblical book of Hebrews, there's this chapter that's basically a hall of fame for faith. But it's got this weird twist. You see these incredible, spectacular victories right alongside what looks like total crushing defeat. It's a real paradox, and we're going to dive right into it.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like the beginning of a really weird joke, right? But it's actually the key question for this whole passage. And the answer, well, it ties together victory, suffering, and endurance in a way that just might flip your whole idea of what it means to win.
All right, so let's start with this so-called Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. The author lays out this list of people, and it pretty much splits into two totally different groups. You've got your champions, the obvious winners, and then, well, you've got the ones who are a bit more complicated. So the list kicks off with some real heavy hitters. We're talking military leaders, kings, prophets, the big names. Guys like Gideon, Samson, and David, they're absolute legends, famous for pulling off these impossible feats, all because they trusted in God. And this is where it gets wild. The author just gave us this incredible highlight reel of victories, right? Conquering kingdoms, shutting the mouths of lions, walking out of blazing furnaces. I mean, amazing stuff. But then, bam, the list keeps going, but now it's about people who were tortured, beaten, even sawn in half. From the outside looking in, these folks look like they lost big time.
And that's the whole point, isn't it? It just makes you stop and ask, wait, what's going on here? If faith is supposed to lead to these amazing victories, then what are we supposed to think about the people whose faith led them straight to a horrible death? It's pretty clear the definition of success in this chapter is not what we think it is.
Okay, so to really get a handle on these so-called losers, we have to get inside their heads. They weren't just helpless victims of circumstance. No, they made a very deliberate choice. And it was all fueled by this hope for what the text calls a better resurrection.
So a lot of these stories come from this really intense period back in the 2nd century BC. A foreign king was basically trying to stamp out their faith. And they were given a choice, a simple way out. Just violate your conscience, eat this forbidden meat, and you walk away free. But they said no. They chose unbelievable torture instead. And you have to ask, why? The answer is they were aiming for something bigger, a better resurrection. See, right before this, the author talks about people who were brought back to life, but they just ended up dying again later. That's kind of like getting bailed out of jail for just one day, These martyrs, they weren't interested in a temporary fix. They were looking past death to the permanent solution, eternal life. They traded a temporary get-out-of-jail-free card for the ultimate prize. And this next line is where the author just completely flips the script. The world looks at these people and sees failure, shame, and total foolishness. But the writer basically hits pause on the list and says, hold on, you've got it all wrong. It's the world that wasn't worthy of them. What an incredible reversal. The world's judgment is what's broken, not their faith. So this whole parade of heroes, the winners, the losers, all of them, it's all been building up to one epic climax. The author saves the most important example, the ultimate example, for the very end, Jesus. Now, Jesus isn't just another name to add to the list. Not at all. He's called the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Think about that. He's the one who blazed the trail for everyone else. He's the one who shows us what faith looks like when it's absolutely complete, totally perfect. He actually embodies both sides of that list we just saw, the intense suffering and the ultimate victory. First up, he endured the cross. He faced the worst hardship imaginable, the most intense pain and hostility, just like those martyrs. But this next bit is so important. He didn't just put up with it. The text says he despised the shame. You gotta remember, crucifixion wasn't just about pain. It was designed to be the most humiliating, public-shaming execution possible. So for him to despise the shame meant he was actively rejecting the world's opinion of him. He was refusing to accept their verdict that he was a failure and a fool. So how on earth did he do that? He did it by keeping his eyes on the prize. Just like the martyrs were looking ahead to a better resurrection, Jesus was looking toward the joy set before him. That's his ultimate victory and place of honor with God. He put temporary shame on one side of the scale and eternal glory on the other, and, well, it wasn't even a contest.
Okay, so after running through this incredible list of heroes, the author basically turns to us, the readers, and says, all right, your turn. And the whole picture changes. We're not in a hall of fame anymore. We're at the starting line of a massive race. And you know that whole list of people we just talked about? They're not just names in a history book. The author says to imagine them as a great cloud of witnesses. Picture a giant stadium, and the stands are packed with every single one of them. And here's the cool part. They're not just random fans. Every single person in that crowd is a past champion. They've all finished this race, and now they're watching you, cheering you on.
So how do we run this race? The author gives us 4 clear steps, like a coach's game plan. First, look up at that crowd of witnesses and get inspired. Second, throw off everything that weighs you down. And that's not just sin, it's anything that slows you down, like worrying about your reputation or fear of losing something, anything that makes you want to quit. Third, run with endurance. Don't give up. And finally, the most important step of all, fix your eyes on Jesus, the one who pioneered the course and already ran the race to perfection.
And all of this brings us right to the present moment, to a really tough question for us today. This ancient text is asking you, right now, what race are you actually running? And what or where is your finish line?
Really, the challenge here is for you to stop and question the definition of success that our culture just hands to us. It means being willing to live like a foreigner when it comes to the world's priorities. It means reshaping your ambitions around what God actually values, not just what gets you likes and praise from other people. It's a call to choose the eternal reward over the temporary comfort, even if it makes everyone around you think you're kind of nuts.
And that's really the final thought to leave you with. All those heroes on that list, from the conquering kings to the tortured martyrs, they all shared one core belief, that the reward God promised was more real and more valuable than anything they could see or touch right here, right now. So the question for us is pretty simple, but it's not easy. When your faith feels like a battle, and the world is telling you you're foolish or that you're losing, what's the reward you're looking toward?